Hello, and welcome to our new study. We finished Acts of the Apostles. Hope you were able to see each of those and perhaps gain a little insight into the mind of Luke and who he was writing to, the Gentiles, Theophilus, and his cohorts. And now I want to take it a little bit of a different direction. Instead of taking one book of the Bible and working our way through it, I want to do what I will call a topical study about prayer, and within that we will use a variety of Bible verses from what we call the Old Testament and what we call the New Testament. So starting with that, I also want to encourage you, as I want to make this a little bit more participatory than it has been. I want to encourage you, if you have questions along the way, or if you have thoughts or comments along the way, please place them in the comment section under this video, or as we continue with the other videos. Also, if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our page and like this video, and that will show other people. I don't know how all the formulas work. I don't want to know. I just know that if you like it and you subscribe to it, other people will see that as well, and they can be invited into that. So, prayer. Several years ago, I think it was part of an evening Bible study during Lent, or a book study, not really Bible, but a book which encouraged Bible verses and included Bible verses. It was a small group. And we were talking about prayer, at least for this one night. There was about 20 people or so in the group, and I discovered that there were almost as many thoughts about prayer and how to pray as there were people. Now, please understand, I'm not criticizing, I'm not saying that to knock anybody's thoughts or prayer practices. I say that simply to point out that praying can be a very personal part of life. For example, how many of you don't have to raise your hand because I can't see anyway, how many of you are comfortable praying out loud before a group of people, not counting written prayers that you may get up in front of the congregation and read on a Sunday morning or another worship service? Say you're part of a group. Maybe in your church you're part of the governing board. We call it a council. You may call it something else. Maybe you're part of a ministry team or some other group of people who meet regularly and serve their church. One day, out of the blue, the chair of the group calls your name and asks you to lead everyone in prayer. Are you the type who will easily pray right off the top of your head? Or are you the type who would suddenly have that deer in the headlights look on your face? There's no right or wrong answer to that. There's just the answer that's true for you. Luke 11:1 reads, Judas, Freudian slip, Jesus was praying in a certain place, and after he had finished, one of his disciples said to him, Lord, teach us to pray as John taught his disciples, meaning John the Baptist. And I want to just pause there for a moment and let you know, I'm going to take these Bible verses that I'm reading and I'm going to put them on a document and find a way to add them to our website. And in the comment section below these videos, I'll put a link to that. I may be thinking I'm smarter than I am in terms of these technologies, but that's my goal. So you don't have to try to write all these down. You can go to the website and you can pull them up. Maybe some of you are smart enough to have a split screen and you can have the Bible verse on one side and this video on the other. So the disciples asked Jesus to teach them how to pray. And it was not that the disciples had never prayed or didn't have a clue how to pray. They were raised in Jewish households. And there were standard prayers to be said each day at certain times of the day. I'm confident that these disciples would have memorized those prayers. Much like today, many of us, if we're regular in church, have memorized what we call the Lord's Prayer. In fact, in response to this request from Jesus' disciples, Jesus responds, "When you pray, say, 'Father, may your name be revered as holy. May your kingdom come. Give us each day our daily bread, and forgive us our sins, for we ourselves forgive everyone indebted to us. And do not bring us to the time of trial.'" That's Luke 11, verses 2 and 4. And I'm going to try to be using the New Revised Standard updated edition. And someone asked me in the Acts Bible study why I was using a different version. And I like to use different versions. Sometimes I try to get ones easier to understand. But as I go through here, I'm going to try to stick with the New Revised Standard Version updated edition, because that's what we use here at Redeemer. That's what a lot of Lutheran churches use. So that response from Jesus probably sounds familiar, although it may be differently translated depending upon which Bible translation you're used to using. As I said, that quote happens to be from the New Revised Standard Version Updated Edition, which is the one I'm going to try to use in this study. And I confess I like to read from a variety of translations, although when I was in seminary some 100 years ago, we were taught that the Revised Standard Version was closest to the original languages: Hebrew for what we call the Old Testament, and Greek for what we call the New Testament. So I've drifted a little bit away from my opening story here, just to make a few points and thoughts along the way. Although what I wanted to help us understand is that we each pray a little bit differently, and that is still okay. Within our small group that I was talking about earlier, my opening story, I discovered a variety of prayer practices, ranging from someone who does not pray every day, and then to the other side of it, someone who prays every day and said she goes throughout the day talking to God about whatever pops up at the time, whenever it feels right, and then it's more like a conversation with God about the day rather than a set pattern of prayer and prayer time. Some said they pray before each meal. Some said they pray only at night before they go to bed, or maybe first thing in the morning when they wake up before they get out of bed. Some say that they know God is so busy and they do not want to trouble God with problems that they believe they can handle on their own. So they only pray to God whenever it's something they don't think they can handle by themselves. And some people pray whenever someone they know is in the hospital or facing some tragedy or traumatic experience, or maybe you're facing that. So that's a key time for you to pray. So the whole point of that is not to choose one. It's to say whatever you do is best for you. And maybe as we go along, you'll start to think there are some ways that your prayer time can grow. Some said, I don't know what to say. So they might use the prayers that are in what we use here as a daily devotion. This congregation offers Christ in our Home. You might use something different, or your congregation may be using a different devotional for daily devotions. As a pastor, I find that I often become the designated prayer whenever I'm part of a group, whenever I attend a function. Even when our governing board, our council, divided up prayer responsibilities ahead of time for the whole year, and people were notified across the entire year, I can tell, or I could tell, that some of those people were anxious. They were nervous about saying the prayer that they'd already written down ahead of time. And when that time was over, there was just this visible relaxation. It's finally over for the whole year. I think every Christian believer would say that prayer is important. Although some might be like Jesus' disciples who ask Jesus to teach them how to pray. And maybe some would want someone else that they consider a good prayer to teach them how to pray. Maybe you're watching this video for similar reasons and you want a more meaningful prayer life and you want me to tell you how. Well, if you're looking for a more meaningful prayer life, you're already taking the right first step. You're watching this video and taking this topical Bible study. The second step may sound a little obvious, but I feel like I need to say it, and we all need to hear it and remember it. You have to pray. You have to do it. If you're like me, you may be old enough to remember an old joke. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? And the answer is practice, practice, practice. That old adage is also one that links to practice makes perfect. And those carry an element of truth to them, even with prayer. Prayer brings us closer to God, opening our spirits to God's Holy Spirit, opening our thoughts to God's thoughts, opening ourselves and our concerns to God's concerns. When we are yielding our will to God's will, we become closer in our relationship to God. Way back many years ago, when I was leading catechism students and teaching about prayer, some would ask whether God answers all prayers. And I usually said, yes, God does. God answers all prayers. And the answers could be different. God could say yes. God could say no. God could say, wait. And I think being told to wait may be the harder answer to hear. Some people have seen so few positive responses, yes, to their prayers, that gradually, perhaps without even noticing it or realizing it, they've come to the very private conclusion that prayer does not help all that much. I confess there have been periods of my life where I felt like my prayers were hitting the ceiling and bouncing back down, seemingly never getting through to God, primarily because either I wasn't getting an immediate satisfying response or I wasn't getting a satisfying response at all. I often quip that I have prayed for God to give me the winning ticket to the $1 million lottery, and God's answer is something like, look, meet me halfway and at least buy a ticket. Joking aside, not believing in prayer anymore does have a profound effect on people's lives. That can create a distance between a believer and God, and it was the believer that created the separation. Tragically, many people do not realize their loss when their relationship with God becomes inactive. Some people have relegated prayer to brief thoughts that are tossed casually toward God, or to desperate pleas during a traumatic ordeal. They may wish prayer will help and secretly not really believe that it will. Or they may think that there is this wondrous and wonderful kind of prayer that they hear about that belongs only to certain people. Prayer can be considered a conversation with God, and it's not restricted to only certain kinds of people. It's not to be placed on hold until we are wiser or more pious or more disciplined, or even until we have more time. There's no supernatural moment when someone suddenly transforms into a prayer warrior, as some like to call others. Some have described it as imagining God sitting right next to you in the chair there, if you have one there, or maybe sitting right across from you and actively listening to everything you have to say to God. And then, this is an important part as well, allowing time for silence when listening for God's response. I have at times compared a person who does not, or who does all of the talking during prayer time, to a person going to see their doctor, rattling off their list of ailments, and immediately jumping up and leaving the office before the doctor has a chance to respond. What would be the purpose? Do you get the correlation? Have you ever heard someone say they would pray for you and then wondered if they really did? Or have you ever told someone that you would pray for them and then kind of neglected to take the time to do it? The backs of our worship bulletins have a lengthy list of people. It pretty much covers the entire back of an 8.5 by 11 sheet. These are people, both members and non-members, who have requested prayers from our congregation. And frankly, with the number of bulletins that are left in the church following worship, I often wonder how many people are actually praying for the people on that list. I wonder how many Christians will say they believe in the power of prayer, yet honestly and frankly devote little time to doing it. Again, I'm not pretending to judge here. I'm in no position to judge anybody. I'm simply making some observations and some of the wanderings and wonderings of my mind. To discover and fully develop, or maybe redevelop, a prayer life, we must rediscover some truths about prayer. Truths that we probably have known all along intellectually, yet have never actually moved from the head to the heart. Well, first, let us be completely honest with ourselves and with God. If you do not believe prayer works, you do not have to confess it in the comment section below these videos, yet you should confess it to yourself and confess it to God. I once heard a sermon in which the preacher shared a story. It wasn't the whole sermon, but part of it. And he talked about a seminary professor that he had who didn't actually lose his faith, yet he lost his confidence in prayer. I confessed earlier that I've had periods like that in my life where I wasn't so confident my prayer was getting through to God. Well, this said professor even stopped attending the daily chapel service at the seminary. His integrity, however, would not allow him to continue in his job. Seminary president. Yeah, the president of the seminary lost his confidence in his prayer life. So while he was experiencing this prayer slump, he resigned. ultimately he worked, if you will, his way back into a prayer life. He did it by hanging around with people who were praying. There's a novel idea, huh? If you reach a point where you lack confidence in prayer, then please do not think of yourself as hopeless. As I confessed earlier, I've been there. And apparently, I'm not alone if a seminary president has been there. So if you are there, you can also rest assured it is possible to recover that prayer life. Perhaps you have a trusted friend or a mentor or a spiritual guide with whom you can discuss your situation openly and honestly, someone that you can trust to not scold you, rather someone who walks beside you along that journey. You may want to consider saying a prayer to God, something like one of these. God, I do not believe that prayer helps. I'm sorry, I just cannot lie. Please, God, create within me a belief in prayer. Simple, honest. Or, God, I can believe prayer helps some people, just not me. Please, God, create within me a greater belief in prayer. Help me to believe and feel about prayer the way you intend for me to believe and feel. That's honest, it's simple, and wait for God to respond. In Mark chapter 9, you can read the story of a man whose son is possessed by a spirit that will not let the boy speak and often dashes him to the ground, gnashing his teeth and foaming at the mouth. The man brought his son to Jesus, Jesus' disciples first, yet they couldn't do it. They couldn't cast out this evil spirit. So the father begs Jesus, if you are able to do anything, please help. And Jesus looks directly at the man and he says, if? And then he tells the father, all things can be done for the one who believes. And the man cries out to Jesus. I think this is a great response. I believe, help my unbelief. That's kind of where I was going with those earlier prayer examples. I believe, help my unbelief. And later, when the disciples are alone with Jesus, they ask, why couldn't we cast it out? And Jesus said to them, this kind can come out only through prayer. That's Mark 9, a variety of verses. Prayer has power. And sometimes it seems we need to declare to God and Jesus, I believe, help my unbelief. Bible verses about prayer can be found throughout the Bible. I want to share some with you now. And again, go to our website. I'll put the link below the video to take you directly to read some of these for yourself if you like. And I know somebody out there is smart enough to split their screen and have one on each side, the video and the prayers, or the Bible verses. So Matthew 18:19 says, truly I tell you, if two of you agree on earth about anything you ask, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. Matthew 21:22 reads, whatever you ask for in prayer with faith, you will receive. John 15:7 reads, if you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. Luke 18:1 reads, then Jesus told them a parable about their need to pray always and not lose heart. And Jesus gives us some examples of his own prayer life. Mark 1:35 reads, in the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. Luke 3:21 reads, now when all the people were baptized, and when Jesus also had been baptized and was praying, the heaven was opened. Let's see, Luke 5:16 reads, "Meanwhile, he," meaning Jesus, "would slip away to deserted places and pray." Luke 6:12 reads, "Now during those days, he," meaning Jesus, "went out to the mountain to pray, and he spent the night in prayer to God." Luke 9:28 reads, "Now about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter and John and James and went up on the mountain to pray." By no means is this an exclusive or exhaustive list. When you read the Bible, you will find more examples. Yet this gives us evidence that prayer was an essential part of Jesus' life. Why would Jesus need to pray? Since Jesus already knew the mind of God, right? Why would Jesus need to go off to some place where he could be alone and pray? I don't think Jesus simply teaches and then stops there. I think he leads by example, not merely with words. Jesus encouraged his disciples to pray. Jesus encourages us to pray. And he gives examples within his own life. If prayer was that important to Jesus, how much more should prayer matter in our own lives? So I want to stop there for this first session on the video. I want you to pause it. You can turn it off, whatever, at this point. But I want you to do a little assignment. Consider in your own life, if one exists, what seems to be the stumbling block to an active prayer life. And maybe if you keep a journal, this would be a good place to write down whatever your thoughts are about that. Whatever is keeping you from a regular prayer life with God. You can write them down for future reference. You can go back and pray about them. And you might even, Nikki Gumbel, who teaches the Alpha series, says sometimes he writes his prayers out so that later he can go back to them and realize they were answered, and he ticks one off, he says. We might say checks one off. There's an idea too. Maybe those stumbling blocks are busyness or lack of time. It's not always possible to bring the world to a screeching halt, not even for a brief moment of prayer. Sometimes some event insists on having us pray about it while we're actively doing something else. I try to say a prayer whenever I'm driving and I see an accident on the side of the road. I don't recommend closing your eyes when you pray unless you first stop your car. Not in the middle of the road. Get off the road if you want to close your eyes and bow your head. Or maybe just talk to God a little bit while you're still driving. I think I can manage that. Maybe you can too. Yet a brief prayer for health, for well-being, for whoever was involved in that accident, for those victims, that can be so powerful, even though we may never know what happened. As I said, I want to stop there. I'm right about at that time limit on my cell phone here. So thank you for joining me. I hope you find this helpful. I hope you continue to watch each week. Again, leave comments or questions in the section below. If you don't want to do that, my email is pastorallman@gmail.com. If you want to email me directly, we can talk that way, or I can address one of your thoughts or questions in a future video. Thank you for joining me. Please continue to join me and subscribe and like this video. Take care. God bless.